From theCUBE studios in Palo Alto and Boston, bringing you data-driven insights from theCUBE and ETR. This is Breaking Analysis with Dave Vellante.
The agentic era is forcing a reset in enterprise architecture. Agents taking action, they go far beyond just analyzing data that's living in a lakehouse. Agents acting on behalf of humans continuously at machine scale bring new architectural requirements to the enterprise. The so-called modern data stack, as most organizations know it, has become a sort of new legacy. No longer can organizations rely on stitched together systems, fragmented governance, batch pipelines, and historical security boundaries. As we move from human scale dashboards to agent scale execution, fragmentation becomes an operational and compliance risk. This is where we believe Google has an underappreciated advantage. Our research indicates that the winning architectures in the agentic era will be the ones that operate as a coherent end-to-end system, where the model, the cognitive engine, and the infrastructure are tightly integrated and share a single trusted boundary, consistent security controls, and an efficient cost structure that can generate tokens in volume but doesn't collapse under thousands of agent interactions occurring every minute. This is the premise behind our Google thesis. We believe Google is in a strong position to build on decades of infrastructure and data excellence and push toward an AI-powered cloud that goes beyond a reactive system of intelligence to one that actually takes action at scale. So essentially, we see Google as one of the companies that's best positioned to execute on our vision of delivering a real-time digital representation of an enterprise. In other words, one that blends the power of generative AI with trusted and consistent determinism to deliver a real-time actions that leverage both structured and unstructured data and can execute transactions at scale. Now, we emphasize that a key reason Google can credibly make this claim comes down to full stack control and deep engineering DNA. Google is one of the few players that can optimize the entire stack, the compute layer, including TPUs, the global network, the security and identity surface, the data engines, and application layer where enterprise value is ultimately realized. This is significant because in an agentic world, the system bottlenecks move constantly from data movement, latency, identity, policy enforcement, cost per token comes into play. So the game is constantly shifting. Platforms built as patchworks are going to find it really difficult or even impossible to optimize across all those variables and then synchronize in real time. A platform designed as an integrated stack can tune for the actual workload and adjust as necessary. While Google's advantage lies in its world-class infrastructure, the firm also has demonstrated leadership in large-scale data systems, including transactional systems, which we see as critical to our vision of an enterprise digital twin with agents that can orchestrate people, places, things, and activities, i.e. processes. In the agentic era, we see the database and the transactional layer as key enforcement points for trust, policy, and auditability, not just the data store. Now, the broader bet is that the market is moving from owning tools to owning outcomes. And we see this in emerging models that price on value via outcomes, not seats, as an example. In our view, Google, with its AI native execution, frontier model leadership, end-to-end stack control, flexibility across cloud and on-prem, also with its open source contributions, position the company for continued success. In our view, this combination is what will separate platforms as AI shifts from experimentation to always-on execution at scale. In this breaking analysis and ahead of Google Cloud Next, we update you on our Google Cloud scenario. We'll look at the company's market momentum, spending patterns from our ETR partner, and we'll also close with what to look forward to at Google Next 2026. So let's start with the story that's been driving markets for the last several quarters, and that is the CapEx spend by the hyperscalers generally and Google specifically. So look at the rise in Alphabet's CapEx estimates. They're well north of $150 billion for 2026, approaching $200 billion. Think 175 to 180 billion is kind of the common sweet spot range. Combined with Amazon, which is at $200 billion, Microsoft, Meta, Oracle, and of course Google, we're looking at around $700 billion this year in CapEx. And of course, most of that for all of these firms is going into compute. And for Google, this represents a rough doubling of CapEx, and they're spending heavily, of course, on TPUs sourced from its partner Broadcom, and at the same time, they're securing access to NVIDIA GPUs. Remember, our core NVIDIA thesis is that their full stack integration across CPUs, GPUs, networking, I/O and storage, LPUs from Grok, CUDA, associated libraries, that's going to confer significant cost advantages to NVIDIA's stack, especially as they roll out the next generation of systems. So performance per watt becomes really important. NVIDIA is going to have an advantage there. And any purveyor of AI, we think, has to get access to NVIDIA tech, or they're going to fall behind. So not only Vera Rubin, but subsequent platforms, and of course they just announced the new Feynman, but we'll see when that starts shipping. But all that said, Google, with its mature TPUs, has a clear opportunity to both control its own destiny to a great extent, and then fill gaps in workloads where NVIDIA's GPUs are either overkill or can't be secured or supplied because of constraints. So while we're really high on NVIDIA's prospects as a leader, not the leader in AI, the Broadcom-Google relationship has real traction with customers because the demand for compute is so high that any quality compute solution is going to find a place in the market. Now, normally this type of CapEx spend would cause real consternation from investors, and they would send the stock on a downward trend, but this hasn't happened with Google for the most part, as you can see here in the one-year stock chart of Google as of this AM. The stock is up 118% in the past 12 months and is only one of two companies that has a market capitalization over $4 trillion. NVIDIA is the other one, and Apple, of course, is hovering just below $4 trillion. It'll enter that range and then pop in and out. Why is Google bucking this trend? It's because the company is showing a clear link between CapEx, spend, and return. Now, Google's able to do this because of advertising, which comprises the lion's share of its revenue, 75–80% of its revenue, and probably even much more, actually, of its profits. Comparatively, Google Cloud's contribution is de minimis, but as we're going to show in a moment, it's still a tremendous business. So the dots that you see here on this chart, they represent their events and mostly represent analyst earnings adjustments, which this year have either been buys, strong buys, or upgrades for Alphabet. Now, despite the small contribution of Google Cloud, it's still a tremendous business, as we just said, and it's getting stronger. Here's a picture going back to 2020 based on companies reporting. So look at it, Google Cloud, it's a $72 billion run rate business, just taking Q4 and multiplying it by 4, with consistently improving operating margins. That's shown in the red. And it's starting to approach the operating margins of AWS, which those margins bounce between the low to mid 30s, sometimes high 30s, generally. Now remember, this is Google Cloud all in, which includes IaaS, PaaS, and Google Workspace apps. So one would expect higher margins, but Google Cloud was in the red for years and started to show a small operating profit in 2023, and now it's looking quite good for Google. So despite this being a small piece of the company, it's a business that's growing in the high 30s annually with great momentum. Okay, let's take a pause here and double click into the IaaS and PaaS business to try to do an apples to apples comparison with some of the other hyperscalers. So this is theCUBE researchers' market data for IaaS and PaaS comparing AWS, Azure, Google Cloud Platform, Alibaba, and Oracle. Now you remember, Google doesn't disclose GCP revenue or its growth rate. What it does is it talks about Google's overall cloud business, and then it makes sort of other comments that sort of hint to the, like it'll say that Google Cloud Platform grew significantly faster than Google's overall cloud business. And you have to kind of interpret that. We look at ETR data, we look at our own surveys to try to sort of pinpoint what GCP actually does. And remember, this is IaaS and PaaS, so we're trying to make an apples to apples comparison with AWS. We have to do the same thing with Azure that we do with Google. They sort of, Microsoft, as we've reported, changes definitions quite frequently. Google's not nearly as difficult to track, but it doesn't really give much information. But nonetheless, GCP revenue, by our estimates, is at a $50 billion run rate business. So, and it's growing faster than any of the clouds. You can see here, it's growing at, last year it grew at about, or we expect it this year to grow in the 45% range. So that's pretty substantial. And you go back to 2020 and you're talking about a $5 or $6 billion business. It's now, a $50 billion run rate business. So that's pretty impressive. It's still well behind the two leaders. You can see, I mean, we forecast that AWS is going to be almost 160 billion this year and Azure at 120 billion. So, it's only, Google's only 12%, GCP specifically, only 12% of what we're defining here as the big five of the market when we include Oracle. So they struggle to gain share only because AWS and Microsoft are so large. They throw off massive amounts of revenue each year. You can see on this chart with 26 to 25 delta, or 20, should have said 25 to 26 delta. I guess it's 26 minus 25, that works. You can see Azure and AWS throwing off $30 billion of incremental revenue each year. Interestingly, Azure actually throwing off more now by our estimates than AWS. We'll see if that comes true. But GCP, it's growing at $13 billion a year now, which is just astounding. So you see Oracle comes into the mix and it's kind of buying share with aggressive CapEx spend, and it's leveraging its software margins to be able to afford that expansion. But the bottom line is Google is doing very well. Its quality tech stack and AI chops are positioning it, really, quite impressively relative to others and relative to, frankly, its historical position. It's kind of the tortoise versus the hare, and Google's patient capital has begun to really start to pay off. So we're going to dig into that in a moment. But let's look at Google's cloud business in more detail by bringing in some ETR data. So this is a chart that we like to share often. It basically shows ETR's net score granularity in some detail, and I'll explain what that means. So net score is a measure of spending momentum. And what that means is if you see the lime green, that is new logos, essentially. It's new adoption. And you can see it's relatively small, single digits for Google Cloud. And you can see on the left-hand side, the portions of the taxonomy that I've selected is starting with analytics, which is the BI piece of the business, security's in there, machine learning. I put contact center in there because we include in AWS's number, their contact center. So I thought that was a fair apples to apples comparison. Obviously Google Cloud Platform, that's the IaaS business. And then, GCP containers. And so, you'll see it down below. If I scroll down, you'd see the data platforms as well, BigQuery's in there. So it's really the IaaS and PaaS. And you're talking about an N of almost or actually approximately 1,000. I think it's just over 1,000 in the survey. The lime green is new logos. The forest green, which is the lion's share here at 41%, is really driving, a lot of the momentum. You can see the gray is, sorry, let me back up. The forest green is spending going 6% or more. And that's 41% of those 1,000 customers. And then the gray, 43%, is flat spending, plus or minus 5%. The pink, which is 5% of the base, means 6% spending down 6% or lower, worse. And then the red is churn. So if you subtract the red from the greens, you get net score, which is that blue line. And I have it here at 41%. That's actually a mistake. It's around 38% for the total. So I apologize for that. I'll fix that in the published material. But you can see here, in the yellow line is pervasion. What does pervasion mean? That's the percent of that cloud computing market, or the percent of the market in this case, that Google participates in, that is Google's, essentially it's a proxy for market share. And you can see that steadily has been increasing since January of 2023. So kind of post ChatGPT has been good to Google Cloud. So let's now look at how cloud fares relative to the competition. Alex, if you bring up the next slide from a customer spending perspective, this is another version of the sort of ETR data. On the vertical axis is net score. It says shared net score. On the horizontal axis is overlap. Overlap being the account penetration into the data set. This is the cloud computing data set. You can see that I've sort of highlighted in red the cloud computing sector. And I'm only showing here Microsoft, AWS, Google Cloud Platform, Oracle, and CoreWeave. And you can see Google Cloud just under 40%. Anything over 40% is considered highly elevated. So if you remember back to the previous chart, I had that error. I said 41%. It's just under that. It's like 38, 39%. Actually, you can see it up here in the upper right. Google Cloud Platform, 38.2%. In the N is 529. So the previous one had a larger N because now we're just isolating on the cloud computing and doing the comparison. Remember, this is an account metric on the horizontal axis. And so because Microsoft is so pervasive, you can see they have 1,094 N, they're always going to dominate. And you can see AWS at 914 and Google Cloud is, far behind that at 529. What's impressive, frankly, about AWS and Azure, they get consistently over the 40% mark, which is awesome. Google hasn't been able to crack that, with its Google Cloud Platform. But as we'll see in a minute, the machine learning and AI piece of its business are quite strong. You can see then CoreWeave, and Oracle, from a momentum standpoint and on the x-axis are far behind the three leaders. But let's go to the heart of the matter, which is, Alex, if you bring up the next slide, which is the tailwind of AI that's powering Google generally and Google Cloud specifically. So this is that same colored chart, that sort of granular chart. It actually has the proper net score this time. Let me go through it again. Remember, lime green is new ads, and you can see it's a little higher. Remember, the previous chart was 8%, and now we're at 10%. And you can see July 24th, that lime green was 19%. So you had a lot of people, new logos coming into Google Cloud, and that's continuing. The forest green again is plus 6% spending or more, and you can see that's 53% of the total. Remember on the last one it was 41% of the total. And you can see the gray flat spending is 33%, and that's sort of been compressed. In the previous slide it was 43%. It was actually the biggest sample. And then you see the red it's trivial. I mean, it's basically single digits of spending down or churn. So remember, you subtract the red from the green, and you get, in this case, the blue, which is 57.4%. Remember what I said, that anything over 40% is considered highly elevated. So this is a really strong story for Google's ML and AI sector. You can see on the left here, I've just clicked on ML AI. That's the only thing we're isolating on. You can see the dramatic rise in the yellow, the pervasion. So basically, Google is kicking butt in ML and AI, and that is translating to momentum in its cloud business. So let's take a look and drill down into that similar XY view with just the AI ML, Alex, if you bring in the next slide. You can see here, same thing, vertical axis, shared net score, horizontal axis is overlap or penetration into the data set. We're isolating this time on ML AI, whereas before it was just cloud computing. So interestingly, if you recall, Google Cloud Platform had 529. So the cloud was 529 N. Look at this, 556 N for Google in the upper right-hand corner. So when you just isolate on ML and AI, it's about the same. So what does that tell you? It tells you that people are really leaning in to Google for its AI. And of course, that's driving a lot of its cloud, because that's how you get Google ML and AI. At any rate, you can see what a difference this makes. Now, I excluded Microsoft from this only because Microsoft, because they have such high account penetration, they always kind of pollute the data. And OpenAI is kind of a proxy for Microsoft, because they get, a lot of their AI inference comes from OpenAI. Look at Anthropic, off the charts. So if you go back to sort of 2023, OpenAI was way, way up and to the right. Anthropic has done two things. It's soared to the right, but it's also soared in the vertical axis. Back to where Metalama, if you go back to 2023, 2024, Metalama was up in the 70, 75% range. It's fallen behind now. AWS and Anthropic have a very tight relationship. But that's interesting to see. But note that Google has a higher account penetration on the horizontal axis versus AWS's 518. Google's got 556, and Anthropic right up there with almost 500. So that is really impressive. Of course, we know the story with Anthropic and the enterprise. They seem to be getting it done. So that's kind of the picture. And the basic premise here, what we're seeing in the data is that Google's AI momentum is powering its cloud. So what I want to do now is just close with some things that we want to watch at Google Cloud Next this coming week. Alex, if you bring up the last keys, the first thing we're going to look for is proof that the AI spending, skyrocket is paying off for enterprise customers. So we know it's paying off for Google's advertising business. I want to take a quick aside here. I made this statement a while back. In fact, David Floyd and I did a breaking analysis on this, that Google's cost to serve a search query is pennies. It's tiny, right? It's pennies, fractions of pennies on the dollar. And we said that its cost to serve AI are 100x that. Now, while that cost is still high or higher than serving ads or serving search requests, we believe it's come down significantly through architecture and caching and just common queries, that Google has cleverly brought down that cost. And of course, it has its TPUs, so it can control some of its costs. But at any rate, we want to see evidence, number one here, that it's paying off for enterprise customers, not just Google's advertising business. And the most dramatic indicator of this is going to be, okay, you got that massive CapEx spend going from 100 billion to 180, let's call it, in a year. That type of skyrocket is going to continue to be scrutinized by investors and analysts alike. So we'll be watching for proof of that payoff. The other thing we want to see here is the frontier model roadmap. We think that's going to be really important. That's number 2 on the list here. We want to see what's new in Gemini and the related models. What's new that materially changes enterprise adoption? Is it tool use? Is it reasoning? How they're leveraging MCP? How they're leveraging A2A? How easy it is to build and implement reliably AI that's multimodal, maybe different latency tiers. I want to see more about how Google is productizing these models into repeatable enterprise primitives. Not just demos, not just I need 1,000 JP Morgan Chase class engineers to get this done, but we want to see what's coming out of the box, what policy controls and governance and deployment templates and success stories are out there. Remember, our other premise is that LLMs and the frontier models, and there are really only right now, 4 leading frontier models, Google's one of them, we think they're going to play a bigger and bigger role in sort of guiding the future of software. So we'll be looking for confirmation of that. All right, the next one is we want to basically understand, number 3 here, infrastructure economics, TPU and infrastructure economics. Where does NVIDIA fit? Sundar Pichai has said, he's made the emphasis that, they talk about their TPUs, but he's also said, we have a great relationship with NVIDIA. And this, again, ties into our NVIDIA story with not only with Blackwell, but also Vera Rubin coming into play, that you need access to Vera Rubin if you want to compete on perf per watt, especially when, you're at the frontier. And so, where does NVIDIA fit? Where do TPUs fit? We know they fit everywhere, right? They fit across the stack. Of course, Google wants to use its own infrastructure, but look for announcements of hyperscale data centers, custom tensor processing unit, clusters, global networking, where that fits. We've talked about the challenges of scaling GPUs and GPU clusters and the challenge that networking and now I/O brings, so we'll be looking for that. We'll want to see signs that this isn't just speculative growth, that this is infrastructure built specifically to dominate the AI market generally, but also the enterprise specifically. So the impact of this massive CapEx is obviously evident, but we want to see it translate into the scale of new capabilities being discussed and announcements that are being made, customers that are being showcased. We want to see a TPU roadmap. Those details should definitely translate into customer outcomes. What do we mean? Cost per performance, cost per watt, availability, networking, inference efficiency, and how it compares to GPU stacks. I'm not sure Google's going to do a head-to-head the way that Amazon does with, make statements about Trainium. I think it's got to be careful about that because I think some of those statements may prove dubious. But anyway, we want to see proof that Google can optimize end-to-end workflows and workload economics, training and inferencing at scale, not just raw benchmark claims. Okay, next one, number 4. Agentic Data Cloud Reality Check. We want to see whether Google truly delivers on a system of action, let's call it, like a closed loop system from signal to decision to action, not just kind of warehousing and analytics with LLMs and agents thrown on top or built in. Real core end-to-end loops. Okay, we want to see what's real in semantic context and data harmonization, unified governance, sort of real-time data activation, something we've talked a lot about on Breaking Analysis, and reducing that data movement, which is the biggest hidden tax in agentic systems. All right, we also want to see data platform differentiation. So transactions and analytics coming together, how Google basically tightens that integration across BigQuery, transactional engines. They've got Spanner, they've got AlloyDB, they've got Vertex, so that agents can act on live business data, not just analytic data in a warehouse or a lakehouse, but actually bring in transaction data. So we want to look for advances that reduce the glue work, pun intended AWS, with unified metadata, policies, the lineage, and consistent access controls across multiple data types. Now, finally, look, we didn't mean to leave out security, but we got a good dose of Google security at RSAC this year. We sat down with Google representatives and had some really great conversations. So we want to close on ecosystem expansion. This is critical. Partner leverage is a direct contributor, and we want to see how it contributes to Google's cloud momentum. It's been a not-so-secret weapon of AWS's over the years, and with Google's AI excellence, it should translate into partner and ecosystem momentum and ultimately win-win revenue. So that's it for now. We're going to be at Google Cloud next week. I'll be there as part of the analyst program. John Furrier and the team are going to be there as with theCUBE. I'll pop in if I can. George Gilbert is also going to be there. George and I are going to be doing a breaking analysis on Thursday that will prepare George with his deep dives with all the engineers. He'll be coming back with his reporter's notebook, and I'll be bringing in what I learned from the analyst program. We'll be working on that, each night, all week, and then we'll deliver that for you guys on the weekly breaking analysis. All right, that's it for now. Thanks for watching, everybody. Thanks to Alex Morrison and Ken Schiffman on production, and we'll see you next time. Oh, and thanks for our friends at ETR. Check out etr.ai. Unbelievable. Thanks to our friends at SiliconANGLE, Rob Hof, Kristen Martin, Cheryl Knight, helping to get the word out. Thanks to you all, and thank you for watching this week's Breaking Analysis. We'll see you next time.